under the blazing sun of the desert, where the wind carried whispers of stories untold. A young woman stood with her heart heavy and her spirit trembling. Her voice broke as she confessed, "No man dared to claim me." The words hung in the air, full of sorrow and shame, carried by the silence of the canyon around her. She had lived with the weight of rejection, of being overlooked, of being seen yet never chosen. In her world, being unclaimed was like being unseen, like drifting, without a place to belong. Her tears fell not only from loneliness, but from the fear that her life would pass without anyone willing to stand by her side. And yet, as the sun dipped lower and painted the cliffs in hues of red and gold, an Apache warrior stepped forward. He had been silent until now, watching with eyes that seemed to see deeper than the surface of things. His presence carried both danger and safety, a strange mix that made her heart race. The air seemed to grow still as his voice finally broke through the tension, steady and low. "Then I'll claim you," he whispered, his words brushing against her soul like the soft wind through desert grass. "I'll claim you for all the rest." Those words, so simple yet fierce, struck her like lightning. For the first time, she felt the strength of someone willing to see her as more than forgotten. He was not like the others who turned away, afraid of what it meant to stand beside her. He was willing to carry the burden, to give her a place where none had before. But even as her heart leapt, fear tangled itself around her thoughts. What did it mean for an Apache warrior to claim her? What dangers would come with it? His people, her people, two worlds divided by distrust, suspicion, and scars of the past. Could a single vow in the desert bridge such a chasm? The ground seemed to shift beneath her feet as the moment hung in fragile balance. His dark eyes held her gaze, unflinching, as though he already knew the path he would walk, whether she agreed or not. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust the promise hidden in his voice, but uncertainty gripped her chest. What lay ahead was unknown, and in the wilderness, promises were not made lightly. A choice was being laid before her, one that could bring her redemption, or draw her into a storm she wasn't prepared to face. The desert night began to creep in, stars slowly revealing themselves in the endless sky, and still his words echoed. In her heart, "I'll claim you for all the rest." Was it salvation he offered, or a new kind of captivity? She could not yet tell. All she knew was that her life would never again be the same after this night, and as the silence wrapped around them, with only the flicker of firelight dancing in the distance, she realized this was just the beginning of a story that would test both their spirits. A story where love and survival would collide, where every choice could shape not only their fates, but the future of those around them. She looked into his eyes and for a fleeting moment wondered if she had just stepped into a destiny far larger than herself. But before she could speak, before she could decide whether to accept or resist, a sound stirred in the distance hoofbeats, faint but growing closer. Whoever approached carried with them the power to change everything. Would they bring safety or ruin? She held her breath, caught between fear and hope, knowing the next moment could shatter the fragile thread that had just begun to weave between her and the Apache. And with the desert watching in silence, the story paused on the edge of revelation, leaving her heart and hours hanging in the balance. The sound of the hoofbeats grew louder, carrying with them an unease that spread through the night air. She felt her breath catch, her body tightening with the instinct to flee, but her feet refused to move. The Apache warrior didn't shift, didn't blink, didn't even glance toward the darkness where the sound came from. He stood tall and unyielding, his hand resting near the hilt of his blade, as though he had expected this moment all along. The firelight flickered across his face, and though his features were calm, his eyes burned with a focus that warned her danger was near. Her mind raced, with questions she didn't dare ask. Who was coming? Why now? Had they been followed, Or was this the desert's way of reminding them that peace could never last for long? She swallowed hard, her voice trembling when she finally managed to whisper, "Do you know them?" His silence, in return, was almost worse than any answer. The hoofbeats slowed, the rhythm steady, deliberate, drawing nearer with each breath. She could see shadows moving in the distance now, riders silhouetted against the faint silver glow of the rising moon. They were not many, 3, perhaps 4, but in the quiet of the desert, even a few could mean the end of everything. She gripped the fabric of her dress tightly in her fists, wishing she had something, anything, that could defend her. Yet she knew, even armed, she would never stand as he did, firm, unshaken. As though fear had no place in him, the riders came to a halt just beyond the glow of the firelight, their shapes indistinct but their presence heavy. A voice, sharp and cold, cut through the silence. "We've been looking for her." The word struck her heart like a blade. For her? She staggered back a step, confusion and dread mixing until she felt dizzy. Who were they? How could strangers from the night know her name, her story, her sorrow? The Apache warrior finally spoke, his tone steady and dangerous. "She is not yours to take." Those words, simple as they were, held a weight that made the men hesitate. She felt it too, that fierce claim, that vow spoken in fire and stone. Her chest tightened. He had said it before, quietly, just for her. Now he said it openly, defying whoever these men were, daring them to try and take her. One of the riders urged his horse a little closer, the animal's hooves striking the dry earth with finality. She could see his face now, hard eyes, a cruel smirk, a man used to getting what he wanted. He leaned forward in the saddle, his voice dripping with mockery. "And who are you to speak of claiming? She doesn't belong among your kind. You'd risk your life for a woman unwanted by her own people?" His words cut deep, reopening wounds she thought she had buried. Her chest burned with shame, but before she could turn away, the Apache warrior's hand lifted slightly, silencing the sting of those insults with his presence alone. "She belongs to herself," he answered, his voice low but fierce. "But if you seek to harm her, then you'll find me in your path." The man laughed, a harsh sound that echoed across the barren land. Big words for one standing alone. But the warrior did not flinch. His hand brushed the handle of his knife, his shoulders squared against the odds. The tension grew so thick she could barely breathe, her eyes darting between them, knowing one wrong move could ignite a storm of violence. But just as quickly as it had come, the moment shifted. The riders did not advance, nor did they retreat. They lingered in the shadows, exchanging glances that spoke of uncertainty. Finally, the leader spat into the dirt, his smirk faltering. "This isn't over," he muttered, with a sharp tug. On the reins he turned his horse, the others following. Slowly, steadily, the sound of their hoofbeats faded into the night. She exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, her knees weak beneath her. Her heart pounded, her body trembling, but still she remained standing. The Apache warrior watched the riders vanish, his eyes fixed on the distance until there was nothing left but silence and stars. Only then did he turn back to her, his expression unreadable. "You have enemies," he said quietly, almost as though speaking to himself. "Enemies who would hunt you even here." Her lips parted, but no words came. She didn't understand. She had lived her life in quiet sorrow, hidden from attention, too often ignored. How could she possibly have enemies? She shook her head. Voice small. "I don't know why. I don't know who they were." He studied her for a long moment, his eyes searching, as though trying to peel away layers she herself didn't know she carried. Finally, he turned and walked toward the fire, the flames casting his shadow long and sharp across the ground. She followed hesitantly, Every step weighted with questions. As they sat near the fire, its warmth chasing away the chill of night, she couldn't stop the flood of thoughts that swirled inside her. The men's words still rang in her ears, unwanted. By her own people. It was true, wasn't it? No man had ever dared to claim her, to stand for her, until tonight. Yet here was this warrior, risking himself against strangers, speaking words she could hardly believe belonged to her. She looked at him across the fire, the light flickering in his eyes, and whispered, "Why did you stand for me?" Her voice cracked, almost too soft to be heard. He didn't answer immediately. His gaze dropped to the flames, and for a moment she wondered if he would remain silent as before. But then he spoke, his voice slow, deliberate. "Because I've seen the way they look at you, the way they pass you by. They see nothing worth standing for. But I see more." His words carried no hesitation, no doubt. He spoke them as if they were truth carved in stone. Her throat tightened, tears threatening again, though she fought them back. No one had ever spoken of her that way. No one had dared. She wanted to believe him, but fear clawed at her. What if he was wrong? What if she was nothing more than the woman the others mocked and dismissed? The fire crackled between them. The night stretching on, filled with silence that seemed to say more than words could. Above, the stars glimmered, endless and cold, as though watching the fragile bond beginning to form between two souls from different worlds. She didn't know where this path would lead, only that it was dangerous, uncertain, and unlike anything she had ever known. And though the riders had gone, their threat lingered in the back of her mind. "This isn't over," the man had said. His promise haunted her now, a shadow stretching into the future. She knew, deep down, that tonight was only the beginning of something far larger, something she couldn't yet name. The warrior shifted slightly, his voice breaking the silence once more. "You'll need to decide soon," he murmured, his eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the firelight. "Whether you'll keep running from the ones who would claim you, or whether you'll stand with me. But know this." He turned to her. Then, his gaze burning with an intensity that made her heart stop. "If you choose me, there is no turning back." Her chest tightened, her breath caught, and for a moment, the world seemed to fall away. His words were not just a vow, they were a warning. And though she longed to ask what dangers awaited, some part of her already knew the answer. The desert held secrets, and so did he. Secrets that would soon demand more than she was ready to give. The flames flickered higher, sparks rising into the night sky, and she realized she stood at the edge of a choice that would change everything. But before she could gather her thoughts, a sound echoed again in the distance, not hoofbeats this time, but something else, something heavier, like drums carried on the wind. Her heart froze. The desert was not finished with them. Not yet. The low, distant sound of drums rolled across the desert like thunder, steady and relentless. She felt the vibration in her chest before her ears truly caught the rhythm, each beat tightening the air around them. The Apache warrior did not move at first, though his shoulders stiffened, his head tilting as if he could hear something beyond her senses. The firelight flickered across his sharp features, but his eyes were fixed on the darkness beyond. She wanted to ask what it meant, what danger the drums carried, but the words stuck in her throat. The night had already unsettled her strangers arriving. Threats whispered, promises made, but this sound was different. It was not men on horseback, searching for her. It was older, deeper, something that felt tied to the land itself. The warrior finally rose to his feet, the movement fluid, controlled. His hand rested near his blade again, though this time his posture seemed more guarded, more thoughtful. "They're calling," he said softly, his voice heavy. She frowned, unsure. "Calling who?" He glanced down at her, his expression unreadable. "Calling me. or maybe both of us." His words sent a shiver through her. The idea of being summoned by something unseen made her skin prickle with unease. She wanted to press him, to demand answers, but he was already turning, his gaze sweeping the horizon as though trying to measure the distance of those unseen drums. The fire crackled behind them, but she felt no warmth. Her mind spun with questions she couldn't shape into words. Who had come for her earlier? Those riders who claimed to know her? Why did this man, this Apache warrior, step forward to protect her? And what did these drums mean? Were they friend or foe? She thought of the man's mocking voice, "She doesn't belong among your kind." The words gnawed at her, forcing her to confront the truth she had always known. She didn't fully belong anywhere. Not among her people who passed her by, nor here in the desert, where shadows seemed to hold more claim over her life than she did herself. The warrior knelt suddenly, pressing his hand flat against the dry earth, listening with more than his ears. After a long silence, he looked at her. "They're close." Too close. His eyes narrowed, as if weighing something heavy. "If they find us, it won't be a choice. It'll be a test." Her heart hammered against her ribs. A test. Of what? Of who we are. Of what we can endure. He stood again, his presence towering, his face drawn tight with resolve. "You said no man dared to claim you. Tonight the desert itself may claim us both." She swallowed hard, her throat dry. His words unsettled her, yet something inside stirred an echo of strength she didn't know she carried. Still, fear was stronger. "What if I'm not ready?" she whispered. He held her gaze for a long moment, his eyes softer now. "No one is ready, but sometimes the path chooses us." The drums grew louder, their rhythm pulsing like a heartbeat through the land. The sound drew nearer, though the night gave no sign of where it came from. She clutched her arms around herself, feeling exposed under the endless stars. 1,000 doubts gnawed at her. If she followed him, where would it lead? If she turned back, what would she find? Only rejection, only those men who mocked and threatened? The warrior moved toward the fire and scattered the burning wood with his boot, dimming its glow until only faint embers smoldered. "We can't be seen," he said firmly. "Not until we know what's coming." She watched as darkness folded around them, the faint glow of the stars now their only light. They waited in silence, listening to the drums, and her thoughts wandered to pieces of her past she usually avoided. Memories of standing alone at gatherings, of hearing whispers that she was cursed, unworthy, unwanted. Faces turned away when she searched for kindness. Even her own kin had treated her as if she were invisible. And now, here in this vast wilderness, she was suddenly the center of someone's vow and the target of someone else's hunt. The shift was dizzying, but what haunted her most was the question of why. Why now? Why her? The warrior seemed to sense her thoughts, his voice breaking the silence. "They will tell you that you're weak, that you're less. They will try to bind you with their words, but you must not listen." He spoke with a conviction that made her chest tighten. Even if you doubt yourself, you cannot doubt the fight inside you. She looked at him, searching his face for answers, for some glimpse of why he cared. But he turned away, his profile sharp against the dim glow of the sky, and she wondered if he was hiding secrets of his own. Perhaps this was not only about her. Perhaps he too carried scars of rejection, of belonging nowhere. Perhaps claiming her was not just about protecting her, but about proving something to himself. The drums suddenly shifted in rhythm, faster now, urgent. She felt it in her bones. The warrior tensed, his hand gripping the hilt of his blade. From the corner of her eye, she saw movement in the distant shadows weaving between the rocks, shapes too quick to define. Her breath caught. They were not alone. Her pulse raced as figures emerged, cloaked in the darkness, their outlines jagged and uncertain. There were more than she could count at first, and they did not ride horses. They moved silently, on foot, their presence like ghosts rising from the desert floor. She gripped the edge of her dress, her whole body trembling, but the warrior stood calm, steady, as though this was exactly what he expected. "They are watching us," he whispered, his tone grave, deciding. She felt the weight of unseen eyes pressing into her, the air heavy with judgment. She wanted to shrink, to disappear, but something inside her fought against it. If this was a test, then running would only prove the whispers true that she was weak, unwanted, nothing. Her breath shook, but she forced herself to stand taller. Though her knees trembled beneath her, the figures did not speak, but the drums continued, faster and louder, until it felt like the whole earth throbbed with sound. She covered her ears, but it did nothing. The rhythm was inside her, echoing in her blood. She wanted to scream, to break the suffocating silence, but the warrior placed a hand gently on her shoulder. His touch grounded her, steadying her in the storm of fear. "Remember what I said," he murmured. "Do not listen to what they call you. Listen only to what you are." She turned her eyes to him, and in that moment she realized something. This wasn't only about enemies or being hunted. This was about identity. About whether she would forever be the woman no man dared to claim, or whether she would rise into something no man could deny. But before she could grasp the weight of that thought, the figures stepped closer, their shapes more distinct now, their faces hidden in shadows. One of them lifted a hand, and the drums stopped at once. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the sound itself. The desert held its breath. She felt her heart pound, loud in the stillness. The figure pointed directly at her, and though no words were spoken, the meaning was clear. The choice was no longer hers to delay. The figure's hand remained lifted in the stillness, pointing straight at her as though the desert itself had chosen its mark. Her breath came shallow, her chest tight, and though no words were spoken, she felt accused, judged, summoned. The fire had long since dimmed into embers, leaving only the pale light of the moon to trace the outlines of the shadows gathered around them. Every movement of the air, every sound of shifting sand seemed amplified, heavy with meaning. The Apache warrior stepped forward, placing himself between her and the figure. His posture was rigid, protective, as if the very act of shielding her gave him strength. But the silence was unbearable, stretching into something sharp, something that cut at her nerves until she could hardly stand it. She wanted to call out, to demand what these people wanted, but her voice betrayed her. No sound left her throat. At last, the figure lowered their hand and stepped closer. The others moved with them, circling slowly, forming a loose ring that closed tighter with each passing moment. The air smelled of earth and smoke, and though their faces were hidden in the shadows, she could feel their eyes, dozens of them, piercing through her. The drums had stopped, but their rhythm still throbbed in her memory, as if her very blood beat in time with that call. The warrior's voice cut through the tension, calm yet defiant. "If you want her, you'll have to go through me." His words carried no hesitation, no fear. She clung to them, but deep inside she wondered, could even he stand against so many? And if he fell, what would become of her? The circle grew smaller. One of the shadowed figures finally spoke, their voice low, rough, but filled with authority. "She carries a weight she does not yet understand. She is claimed by no man because the desert has already claimed her." The words chilled her, more than any cold wind. What did it mean? She wanted to deny it, to shake her head and shout that it wasn't true, but deep inside, something stirred. A part of her she had tried to bury, something she didn't want to face. The warrior took a step forward, his voice rising, fierce and clear. "No, she chooses her path. not the desert. Not you, and not those who seek to use her. His words rang out like steel striking stone. For a moment, the figures hesitated, their movements slowing. But then another spoke, this one closer, there. Tone almost taunting. You cannot protect her forever. She was born to walk a path that destroys all who touch it. Her heart lurched. Destroy? The word echoed inside her, gnawing at her spirit. Was that why no one dared to claim her? Was she cursed, a danger to anyone who stood at her side? She trembled, torn between the warrior's unwavering presence and the weight of the shadow's words. The circle tightened again, the figures pressing. Closer until she could see the faint glint of metal, the outlines of weapons held at their sides. The warrior shifted his stance, ready, unflinching. If you mean to test us, he said, his voice cold as stone, then test us now. Her breath caught. She knew what was coming, the clash, the storm, the violence that had been circling them since the first hoofbeats earlier in the night. Her mind raced with fear, but also something else, a strange, growing strength. She thought of the men who had mocked her, of the shame that had weighed on her for so long. She thought of the warrior's words, listen only to what you are. And for the first time, she wondered if there was something inside her worth standing. For after all, the leader of the shadows raised their hand again, and this time the figures froze. The desert seemed to pause with them, holding its breath. The leader stepped forward, their face now partly lit by the moon. The lines of age and battle marked them, eyes like burning coals fixed on her. If you walk with him, they said, slowly, pointing to the warrior, then you defy the fate set for you. And if you defy it, the cost will be greater than either of you can bear. She felt the ground sway beneath her, the meaning of those words heavier than any chain. She wanted to ask what fate they spoke of, what cost awaited her, but her lips refused to form the question. All she could do was meet their gaze, feeling as if her soul was being weighed and measured. The warrior moved closer to her, his presence steady, grounding. Do not listen, he whispered so only she could hear. They speak in riddles too. Break your spirit. His hand brushed hers for just a moment, and she felt the strength in his touch, a silent vow that he would not abandon her. But even as she clung to that promise, the leader of the shadows raised their voice, the sound carrying across the barren land. Choose now. Walk with him and bring ruin. Or step away and let the desert swallow what it already owns. Her chest tightened. The choice pressed on her like a weight, heavier than the night, heavier than all the years of loneliness. She looked at the warrior, his dark eyes steady, unyielding, filled with a fire that seemed to burn for her alone. Then she looked at the shadows, their circle closing, their voices echoing with fate and doom. The desert itself seemed to lean in, waiting for her answer. The silence was unbearable. Her breath came in sharp gasps, her heart pounding like a drum. The world narrowed to this single moment, her life, her future, the bond between them all. Balanced on the edge of her decision. And then, from the distance, another sound shattered the night. Hoofbeats again, this time many, fast, urgent. She spun toward the sound, her blood running cold. Riders, dozens of them, sweeping across the desert with torches blazing like fire in the dark. The shadows turned, their circle breaking, there. Whispers rising into the air like smoke. The warrior's hand gripped her arm, pulling her back. His voice was sharp, urgent. It's not over. The real storm is here. Her heart pounded harder, her body caught between the unseen power of the shadows and the fierce, unstoppable force of the riders charging closer. The ground shook beneath her feet, the air crackled with danger, and she knew whatever choice she made, whatever path she stepped onto, it would ignite a fire that could never be undone. The desert held its breath once more, and she stood at the very edge of her fate. the storm closing in from all sides. The desert night split open with the thunder of hooves, torches blazing like a storm of fire racing across the earth. The circle of shadowed figures broke apart, slipping back into the rocks as if they had never been there, their whispers vanishing with the darkness. For a moment she stood frozen, torn between the fading presence of the shadows and the fierce approach of the riders. The Apache warrior's grip on her arm was firm, guiding her back, his voice sharp but steady. "Stay behind me." The riders closed in, their torches casting long flames that twisted against the wind. The glow lit the desert floor, and she could see their faces now, men she recognized, men who had mocked her, dismissed her, and spoken of her as though she were less than nothing. At their head rode the same cruel-eyed man from earlier, the one who had laughed at the thought of her being claimed. His smirk had not faded, and now it was joined by the glint of steel at his side. He reined in his horse, circling slowly, his torchlight throwing shadows across her face. "There she is," he said, his voice thick with triumph. "The woman no one wanted, and the fool who thinks he can keep her." His eyes slid to the warrior, narrowing in challenge. "You had your warning, yet here you are." The Apache warrior did not flinch. His voice cut through the night like a blade. "She is not yours. Not now, not ever." The man laughed, the sound harsh and echoing. "Not mine? She was never anyone's. That's the truth, isn't it?" He leaned forward in his saddle, eyes fixed on her. "Even your own kind turned their backs. And now you hide behind him, as if he can erase what you are." His words struck deep, reopening wounds that had never healed. She felt her chest tighten, her throat burn, and for a heartbeat she almost believed him. But then she felt the warrior step closer, his presence steady at her side. His voice lowered only for her to hear. "Do not listen. Their words are chains. Break them." She looked at him, and something shifted inside her. All her life she had carried the weight of rejection, the whispers of being unwanted, the loneliness that hollowed her days. But now she realized those were not truths. They were labels others had placed upon her, and she had carried them because she had not yet learned how to lay them down. The Apache warrior's vow had not erased her pain, but it had revealed something greater, that her worth was not given by others. It had always been her own. The cruel-eyed man dismounted, torch in one hand, blade in the other. He walked forward, the firelight throwing his shadow wide across the desert floor. "Step aside," he sneered at the warrior, "or you'll fall." With her, the warrior's hand rested on his knife, but his eyes never wavered. "If I fall, then I fall standing for her. Can you say the same about what you fight for?" The man's smirk faltered, his voice sharp. "I fight because no one else will, because she is nothing." He swung his blade up, its edge flashing dot. In that instant, everything inside her snapped. The shame, the fear, the endless weight of being unwanted, it no longer held her. Her voice rang out, louder than she had ever heard it before. "I am not nothing." The words tore from her chest, fierce and trembling, but filled with truth. The man froze, his sneer faltering as if the strength of her voice unsettled him. The warrior stepped forward then, blade drawn, his eyes blazing with fire. The other riders shifted uneasily, the certainty in their leader's stance beginning to crack. The desert itself seemed to lean in, holding the silence after her cry. Cruel-eyed man's face twisted with anger, but before he could strike, the warrior moved. The clash was swift, steel meeting steel, sparks flying in the torchlight. The sound echoed through the night, sharp and final. The man staggered back, disarmed, his weapon clattering against the rocks. The warrior stood firm, his blade steady, his voice calm. "Your fight is done." The other riders hesitated, their torches flickering in the wind. None dared to move closer. The cruel-eyed man spat into the dirt, his eyes burning with fury, but he did not advance again. Instead, he turned sharply, mounting his horse with a curse. "This isn't over," he hissed, but his words carried less weight now, hollow against the strength that had filled the night. The riders turned, their torches dwindling as they vanished. Into the distance, the thunder of hooves fading into silence. When they were gone, the desert breathed again. She stood trembling, the echoes of her own voice still ringing inside her. The Apache warrior turned to her, his gaze softer now, though still burning with that unyielding fire. "You spoke for yourself," he said quietly. "That was your strength, not mine." Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they were not of shame. They were of release, of something breaking open that had long been locked away. "For so long," she whispered, her voice shaking, "I believed them. I believed I was nothing." He stepped closer, his hand brushing her arm, grounding her. "They feared your strength. That's why they tried to silence it. But you are not nothing. You are more than they will ever admit." The desert stretched around them, vast and endless, yet for the first time she felt she was not lost in it. She had a place, not because someone claimed her as a possession, but because someone stood beside her and reminded her of what she already carried. The embers of the fire still smoldered faintly, their glow soft against the dark. She sat beside them, her body weary but her spirit lighter than it had ever been. The warrior settled near her, his silence comforting. Together they watched the horizon, the first hints of dawn painting the sky in pale streaks of gold and rose-dot. In the quiet, she thought of the shadows and their whispers, of fate and ruin. Perhaps those battles were not yet finished. Perhaps there would always be storms ahead. But she no longer feared being unclaimed. She no longer believed the lie of being unwanted. She had found her own voice, and with it, her strength. The warrior's words came softly, almost like a prayer carried by the wind. "The desert will test us again. But when it does, you will not stand alone." She turned to him, her eyes catching the first light of morning. For the first time in her life, she believed that. She believed she was not nothing. She was someone who could fight, someone who could choose, someone who could be more than the whispers of others. The sun broke over the horizon then, spilling light across the desert, washing away the long shadows of the night. She felt its warmth touch her skin, and with it, the weight of her past finally began to lift. Her story was not over, it was only beginning. But now, at last, she would walk it with her head high, her heart strong, and her spirit free. And the desert, vast and eternal, bore witness to the woman who had once wept for being unclaimed. Now rising with the dawn, claimed not by any man or fear, but by her own unshakable strength.